on another call since 7. My understanding, and I spoke to Pat a little bit about this earlier this week, is that for you all as a task group, your recommendations document is where it is. There is one question that you all can look at today, which is that new footnote that's been added by you, Richard, I believe. And just review that footnote, make sure everybody's on board with that. That's sort of the one kind of quasi-pending piece in your document. But today isn't a day to reopen the document. You all have worked so hard on that, that's not what we're doing here today. We're going to look at that footnote and make sure everybody's comfortable with that. We can take some public comment. And then for folks who are joining us from the council and the other subcommittees, it's an opportunity to familiarize yourself with not just the document, but the thinking behind it, so that when the council takes this up, that folks are better prepared to have that conversation, because you've really spent some time together working through questions that you had or thoughts that you have about it. The reason I bring that up is I feel like we shouldn't put out there as sort of on the table today, opening up that document again. The document is, you all have reached as far as you're going to go in that document, and that'll be what goes up to the council. And we can have some really good conversations today about understanding what's in there and why it's in there. So that's my understanding of what we're trying to do here today. We have the ground rules that you all use. They're at the top of the agenda. As I said, the last time I was with you all in the group, they're some of the most poetic and lovely ground rules I know. So thank you, Judy, and others who have helped contribute to make those the way you want to work together. Okay, so I'm happy to kick us off here. We've got housekeeping issues in terms of there's a note here about introductions. Are there folks here today that we want to do introductions with, or is that not necessary today? I'll just ask that. Not Jane, I see you shaking your head. Okay, so let's go ahead and skip that. But we do need the housekeeping of approval of the minutes from your previous meeting. Those are linked into the agenda. I can give folks a moment if you want to click through and look at those notes. If anybody needs an extra moment, just let me know. I'll just give folks a sec for that. Any questions or concerns about those minutes, or any need for a little more time to look those over? Okay, great. Let's consider those minutes approved then. That's great. Okay, so and the ground rules, they're there at the top of the agenda. I can throw them in the chat again. If folks aren't familiar with these, they are here we go. There they are in the chat. And that those will be how I'll help you stay to those ground rules. And I love them all. I particularly like the speak your truth while tending to the impact of your words. I'm going to use that in other places. Okay. Great. So we wanted to have a moment here to what we call finalize the revisions, the recommendations. As I mentioned, what's really on the table in that conversation, as I understand it, is that final footnote, Richard, that you put in. And I'm happy to share my screen with this, or Jane, if you want to do that, either way. This what's about to jump on the screen here. This is a footnote at the bottom of the page. And Jane, could you just scroll up to what it jumps from, like what it's, yeah. So it's in this very last piece about engaging relevant state agencies in the Department of Environmental Conservation, Air Quality, and Climate Division, Department of Health, and communities on the consideration and design of implementation of targeted air monitoring and public health studies, right? So that's where it jumps from. And then you can scroll down, Jane. And Richard, do you just want to say a word about this and how it reflects previous conversations you all have had in the thinking?
Sure. This is the one of the very few times during my time with the council that I've actually asserted my professional expertise as an epidemiologist. And this what this footnote says is what I've said aloud a couple of times during our discussions over the last couple of months. It's if y'all think it's unnecessary, I won't object. I'm not heavily invested in putting this in the document, but I was asked at a recent meeting to write something like this that explained why we might prefer recommending an exposure study to an epidemiologic or health study, health condition study. So this distills down what I know about environmental epidemiology into a paragraph.
Thanks, Richard. So yeah, this provides context and the sort of expertise that Richard brings to the story. Judy, go ahead.
Thanks for doing this, Richard. I have a couple of questions. Remember last time when I asked you to define like a small amount of people, and and I think you did it in here. I'm not sure that this is relevant. So I did a demographic search on that area, and within 1 mile, there's 17,532 people. Is that a small amount or is that a large amount?
I'm surprised the number is that high, and that is not a small number.
Okay, well, it's because there might be a driveway on Riverside Avenue, but what that driveway does leads to hundreds of condos in the back that you can't really see. So that's probably why you're surprised. If you go within a 3-mile radius, it's 59,731 people. So I did the same thing for Reigate. And for Reigate, we're looking at about between 4,000 and 5,000 people. Is that a small amount for testing?
These are reasonable population sizes for epidemiologic studies.
Okay, so looking at what you have here and knowing that information, do you think this is necessary?
Judy, I'm surprised by that 17,000 number just from looking at aerial photographs, and so.
Well, don't forget, we're talking about Winooski too. So if you go within a mile circumference, you're talking about Winooski as well. I'd be happy to share the link with you.
You know, as I said, I'm not. I wrote this because there was a request from somewhere on this task group to write this down, and so I wrote it down. I will not be offended if this doesn't make it into the final document.
Well, it just seems peculiar to me that they would build a community health center in the middle of some place that did not have 250 people. And that's why I did this little research.
Okay. So when others are seeing this, knowing that you all have some questions right now about the actual population numbers in a certain distance from those plants, is this helpful in multiple scenarios of how many people there are? Or is this, as Judy, I think you're suggesting, Judy, it feels like since it's not really the case of these plants based on your analysis, then this isn't necessarily really as needed as it was before. Chase?
Thank you. The final sentence of that paragraph, I think, is an important one. And I'm glad that you included it, Richard. And frankly, I defer to folks like you who have done more of this work. But I'm curious, Richard, if you could please just unpack that a little bit and explain sort of like why the exposure assessment could be a beneficial way to understand fine particulate matter levels in that area, as opposed to a full epidemiological study, and just how that works, please.
An exposure study can be done with zero population or a very small population, whereas an epidemiologic study really can't be done with a small population, not usefully.
But like an exposure study, you still learn about levels of like toxic air pollution. You still learn about what the health impacts of that could be. You don't necessarily track like the incidence of asthma, for example, attributable to a particular point source. But you do learn about pollution levels, and you do gain important health information, right?
Right. So, I mean, the assertion has been made that even though the plant is operating within its permitted limits, that the ways of measuring atmospheric particulate pollution don't really capture the exposures on the ground where people live. And so, documenting whether those are in fact elevated as they are suspected to be would be a really important step.
And Chase, do I sense underneath that question also of, wow, that seems like an important sentence to keep in there, so that even if epidemiological studies are challenging to do, that kind of study is helpful to do. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
I think so, David. I think I'm not ruling out at all an epidemiological study. I'm just, noting, I think that Richard raises an interesting point that it can be difficult to do for lots of reasons, including folks might be transient, like living in an area for a time and then moving somewhere else. And the real impacts of exposure to things like fine particulate matter, though felt, could be hard to discern. And so if that ends up being the case, it'd be a shame to just stop our assessment of the health impacts and rather just change course and do so in a way that would fit the situation better. So I just would like this, I think, to be open to doing whatever would end up being the most insightful strategy.
Thanks, Chase. Okay. Billy, go ahead, please.
I was just going to suggest we leave this in. I don't think it predetermines the outcome of what the survey methodology will be. It's helpful information. If it's determined that there's a sufficient population size that these concerns are not valid, then it doesn't matter, right? The study is going to be developed by experts who do this work. So I think this is a helpful footnote. It provides some context, and it doesn't determine the outcome.
Right. So if it's determined there is sufficient population and the conditions to do epidemiological, I'm having a hard time with that word today, you can go ahead and do it. It doesn't say don't do it. It just says these are the challenges for doing it. Okay. Judy, does that make sense? Like sort of the like kind of no harm in including it because it doesn't presuppose that,
Yeah, it does make sense. It just doesn't make sense to add all that stuff about, it's difficult if there's low population, because we know there is not a low population there. And we're talking about, a lot of BIPOC people living in a small place with a large family. So there's a lot of people there.
So would it be helpful for Richard to take a quick stab at the first part of this to say, one challenge is when there's low numbers of people, but not go into it as much, not signaling that that's the issue here. And then spend more time on the mobile and the other issues that are in the.
Yeah, I
Yep.
just I wouldn't want to sway anybody with that first sentence there, that it's difficult because there could be a low population, and it's difficult because we know that it's not true. So why bother to put it in there?
Richard, how does that land with you?
What I really want is for the Vermont Department of Health to weigh in on this question. This is my professional opinion as an epidemiologist, and I think it's defensible, but my opinion matters less than that of the public health officials that are actually responsible.
Okay. I'm curious, just so we, as a way of sort of bringing this to a close, I wonder if the sentences 2 and 3, which are about the size of the population, if they're phrased more like, one issue is ensuring there is a sufficient population size to be blah, It doesn't say that.
Yeah, I mean, I like that language fine, David, and I can't edit it on the screen here, but if you want to edit that language in, it's fine by me.
Okay.
Can you highlight again where you'd like it? I'm happy.
So
to try
the
that.
sentences 2 and 3, if you want to just highlight sentences 2 and 3 and essentially turn those into a sort of more like, one issue is population size and ensuring there is sufficient population to blah, 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 right? And then it goes right into the many American populations are very mobile. So something like that, Judy, that just sort of is less like, puts less emphasis on the population size. It just notes it like you need sufficient population size, and we're not making a judgment call here whether we have it or not.
Yes, and Bram put a note in the chat that even if it doesn't apply to McNeil and Reigate, then it might apply to other sites, and I agree with that comment. So
Yeah. So how about this? I'm not sure how you guys operate, but if you're comfortable with Richard, after this meeting, changing those 2 sentences to say what we're saying right now, right? Which is essentially, this is one thing you have to look at, and then, that's what those 2 sentences become.
I'm fine with what Jane has just done.
Okay.
yeah, I am as well.
Okay, good.
I just don't want it to imply it's not the
Yeah.
right size.
Okay.
Perfect. Thanks.
Nicely done. Okay. All right. So that was the one sort of substantive piece in the document that we wanted the task force to look at. And so with that done, the document that you have is now the document that will go up to the council for the council's review and consideration. What we wanted to do for the rest of our time this morning is provide an opportunity first for some public comment, and then with members of other subcommittees or counselors who might be with us today, provide an opportunity for Q&A and really digging into sort of preparing for the council a conversation that'll happen shortly. So let's go first to public comment, and then we'll go to others here on the call who are part of other subcommittees or members of the council. So just let me check on the public comment side of things. Are there folks here observing the conversation today that would like to comment before we get back towards climate counselors and subcommittee members?
Yes,
Members?
there is.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Hi, my name is Pike Porter, and I'd like to comment that I don't believe that the Vermont emissions inventory is appropriately taking biomass into account. I think Section 10 or Title 10 of Vermont statute requires transparent and accurate reporting, and the inventory I don't think is either. I think there's a lot of science that suggests that biomass is not carbon neutral, and I know that there are others who disagree with that. And I think there needs to be much more attention drawn to that question rather than just assuming it is in state documents. So I would like the Climate Council and maybe the Biomass Task Force, if it continues to operate in this capacity now that you're almost done with this recommendation, to really break out where our biomass and how much our biomass is emitting in carbon emissions, because it's not really clear from any of the documents I see through Agency of Natural Resources or the carbon emissions inventory that's put out how much specifically say McNeil is putting out. So I guess it won't be in these recommendations, but I hope the Climate Council considers that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for that comment. Other folks who are joining us today, observing the meeting, that would like to make a comment? Okay. I'm not seeing other folks. Oh, Cheryl, go ahead. Cheryl.
Sorry, right at the very last minute.
Fine.
Yeah, maybe a comment to Pike and to all of you. Isn't it true that the life cycle analysis is going to reflect what he brought up? The new life cycle analysis, is that going to reflect accurately emissions from biogenic, biomass, et cetera? Not just biomass, but is that true or not?
I think it really depends upon who does that life cycle analysis.
no.
If you look at the life cycle analysis prepared by the folks at Burlington Electric Department, Pike,
that was
I think it could, but I don't think it necessarily will, depending upon who does the study.
I think that was a question for Jane,
I'm sorry,
et cetera, to respond to your issue, your point.
Thanks, Cheryl. Joy. Jane, do you want to just say a word about what the life cycle analysis will cover that's being commissioned?
Sure. Well, first off, biogenic emissions right now are included in the inventory, but as an appendix and referenced in it, and Colin can speak to that more clearly. They're just not added on the gross side of the ledger right now for these kinds of fuels. So, but we calculate them to the best of our ability with the data that's collected from Forest Parks and Recreation and then from other utilities. So, so that's there. We are conducting a life cycle analysis that's just getting underway at the state. So the state is doing that, and it will include biomass as a component of energy.
Super. Okay. Thanks, Jane, for that clarification. All right. Anything else from folks joining us today? Okay. Great. All right. So this is a chance for folks who are in other subcommittees that have been involved in this work, or counselors who are here with us today, and I see a handful, and to ask questions and to sort of help get ourselves as prepared as possible for the conversation that's going to happen at the council level shortly. And Jane has the document and can put it up on the screen whenever we need it. If folks want to point to particular pieces of it, Jane, it should be linked. Yeah, it's linked in the agenda as well, so you can click through to it and look at it yourself. But this is an opportunity to really sort of start wrapping our minds around it and to feel prepared to have the conversation at the council level, and provide additional flavor and input that can go in the notes from this meeting that get transmitted up to the council as well. So let me offer this up as a moment to ask questions that folks have. I see counselors here. I see Bram, I see Jared, I see Kelly, Liz Miller's here on the council. And there's people who've been heavily involved in the subcommittees as well. So this is a conversation that can go in the direction you want it to, but fundamentally it's about how to best understand these recommendations so that we can have as good a conversation as possible in the council. Bram, go ahead, please.
Does anyone know, just sort of order of magnitude, the relative sizes of the utility, institutional, municipal biomass emissions versus sort of individual use in fireplaces, wood stoves, fire pits?
A data question.
We did look at that, Bram. I can't give you exact numbers, but home or just thermal uses in people's homes and buildings produces far more greenhouse gas emissions just because of the amount of them that are out there, and because the combustion that happens in them is at a lower temperature. And so you get incomplete combustion, so you get more fine particulate matter pollution, for example, from home heating. So we did look at that. We looked at a health study that was done by Dr. Buonacore, who looked at fine particulate matter differences between electricity generation and home thermal. So yes, to some extent.
That's great. That's really helpful. And I would have assumed the opposite, that home thermal was insignificant compared to the train loads full of wood chips that roll into McNeil every day. But so thank you for correcting my misperception of the world.
Bram, I'll just add really quickly that another element to that is that wood stoves are often operated not as intended, because an individual doesn't really know how to optimally operate a wood stove, especially if it has like a catalytic combustor or secondary combustion. That type of technology is not often utilized to its full extent by an individual homeowner, whereas McNeil and Reigate are heavily regulated and controlled, permitted facilities that have sophisticated technology to control emissions. So I think that's another element to consider.
And I would also just imagine that, like, in their home wood stoves, people throw like all the wrappings from their Christmas presents that has all kinds of inks and glitter and everything else on it, right? So there's a whole different particulate profile. Got it. Thank you.
Thanks, Bram, for the question. Judy?
I just wanted to add to that. Bram, we wanted to look at those backyard furnaces that people use for heat. But because our scope of work was limited, we didn't have time, or we weren't allowed to do that. But I believe that's an area that should be looked at, because we had lots of comments from public about people burning things like Pampers, and that it really can't be enforced because it's all burned up by the time the sheriff gets there.
Thanks, Judy. Yeah. All right, so other questions, could be comments too. I mean, this is a conversation to have with this task group that's done this enormous lift to get to these set of recommendations. Other counselors or subcommittee members that have some thoughts that want to tease those thoughts out with the task group? And I don't necessarily want to call on anybody. I'm just curious, like Kelly or Jared. Jared, go ahead, please.
Thanks, David. Thanks, everybody, for your continuing work on this. I guess I'll just offer a comment, because I do see in the document the highlighted portion with the option 1 and the option 2. I want to offer a comment on that subject, and I'll just share my opinion. I hope and trust that others broadly share this opinion, but we'll see. I think long term, what I and many others hope for is that our sources of electricity are, fully renewable with storage and load management and distributed, devices able to meet the vast majority, if not all, of our power needs. However, I think we know that we're a ways from that being able to happen technologically. And I think one of the really important things that I know this group has discussed is that, the emissions profile of an electricity source is one thing that is very important. But I think the other distinguishing factor of biomass facilities is the kind of ability to generate power 24/7, 365, and not have the kind of intermittency challenges that we have with solar and wind, for instance. So to me, if there's a question in the abstract, are electricity sources like solar or wind better than biomass generation? Absolutely. But at a practical level, if the phase out or the removal of a biomass facility that is able to run or is running at times when those sources are not available and we don't yet have the storage options to fully get around those intermittency issues, then to me the question becomes, what would replace it? And I would not want to see a situation where we're so firm in a recommendation that a phase out should occur on a certain timeline that it led to additional use of fossil gas, which has I think from far worse implications, both from a climate perspective and from kind of an environmental justice and public health perspective. So I would just want to kind of log my comment on the side of preferring between those two options that are on the table, option 1, because it does not presuppose the outcome of the study. It says if, and I think it makes it more clear that that comparison should happen in relation to what it would replace. It doesn't say that a phase out or a transition away should happen regardless of what would replace it, is kind of my reading of those options. So just wanted to offer that reflection and offer that comment in support of, between those two options on the table, I think option 1 would make more sense.
Okay. And that is exactly the conversation we hope to have in the council level as well, as sort of understanding those two options that this task group has put together. Kelly, go ahead, please.
I just had one thing as I was reading through this that I found a little bit ambiguous. I couldn't figure out what the exact intent was. And that was the line that just says traditional ecological knowledge. And going back to the beginning, it says the studies should include traditional ecological knowledge. And I didn't know if that meant, I didn't fully understand what that meant. And if I was confused, I was wondering if we should put more clarification in that bullet point so that the intent of this task group is more clear.
So what we can do with that, and I'd love to hear from the task group on that right now, is that in the notes from this meeting, we can absolutely capture thoughts from the task group, and that can supplement what goes up. And then if the council's like, ooh, but let's put that in the document, then the council can choose to put that additional language in the document. Folks on the task group, when you put those words, and I don't know, Jane, if you have it, I'm just looking at my screens get a little mixed up. Jane, if you want to throw that document up now, when folks on the task group were made that mention to traditional ecological knowledge, for someone who is less familiar with that, what is the references? Could there be additional detail provided there?
I don't know if I can clarify what I was saying also is that I'm aware of what traditional ecological knowledge is, but my question was, is this to include members of our community who have traditional ecological knowledge in the work planning of the study, to talk to those folks as part of the study? What does this mean? The study should include this knowledge.
Got it. Helpful. Thanks, Kelly. Did you all talk about that? Is there something that you want to share from your conversations about the specific call out to that? Or is there not much more that you have from your conversations to date on this?
We have talked about it. Actually, I did a presentation at one of the committee meetings. The problem is it's often overlooked in every discussion. And I don't know where Jared lives, but we lose our power once a week, anywhere from 2 hours to 15 days. And so traditional ecological knowledge is what has allowed me to survive and still live in my home. And I think we need to consider some of those options.
Can you say a little bit more about that, though, Judy, in terms of Kelly's question about the specific guidance for including that knowledge in the studies that this group's imagining?
Well, I'm not sure this group is imagining it.
Okay.
I was insisting it be in there, hoping somebody would imagine it.
Okay. So it's work to be done to figure out how to address what Kelly's saying, which is how does this actually happen in practice? Okay. All right. Fair enough. Any other task force members want to complement that response?
I can't raise my hand when I'm sharing my screen, but I just thought I would comment that maybe of interest, and maybe this would be something that we could share with the council prior to review of these recommendations, is we did a lot of thinking with Judy and the task group about what it looks like to incorporate traditional ecological knowledge into the life cycle analysis. And I don't think we have it perfect yet, but I think that we're going down a path with a contractor in a way that's unique and that they haven't explored with energy analysis before. And that process is laid out very clearly as a new task and deliverable in that contract. And it's something that I think we as the state should be proud of trying to think about it in a new way. And maybe that sort of would be helpful to review in parallel to this recommendation.
Okay. Thanks, Jane. All right. Okay. Jane, you would put in the chat, it might be helpful to literally just walk through this document for everybody. And I'm happy to do that.
I know that's what people expected last time subcommittee and council members showed up, was they were really interested in just reading them out loud and pausing on each one, and not necessarily reading them out loud, but just reading each one by one and asking specific questions, because the language was really finessed by this group, and rather than broad overarching comments, which I think are really helpful too, and might provide a space for at the end, it might just be good to go through one by one and pause and see if there's any comments.
Absolutely. Well, let's start at the top. So the first one, new electric-led generation biomass facilities in the state of Vermont should not be used. Okay, let's just pause for 1 second on that, number one. Any clarifying questions or doubts, requests for greater information, logic, anything that folks would like to do on that one? Okay. So the next one is about the expansion these two facilities should not be expanded to increase the current permitted hourly output capacity, physically or otherwise. Furthermore, the facility should strive to use less biomass overall than they do currently. I can sense some very specific words were used in this. Judy?
I just want to add to this. BED presented to the city of Burlington this week, and they stated that they wanted to increase and bring heat up to McNeil, the medical center in UVM. And as you all know, we were not really, our work scope did not include heat. But we have extensively talked about that, and Darren Springer had shared with us about that. But he said at this meeting, he was ready to put in an Act 250 permit in the middle of December to do this expansion. And so this wording has me a little concerned if it's strong enough.
Okay. So in the spirit of not changing the wording now, but providing some additional color for the council as it gets into its deliberation, this particular point number 2 does come in the context of this request to do the thermal heat piece, and the consternation around that for some. Billy?
Yeah, thanks, David. To clarify, I think the intent here was that there's an acknowledgement that the existing facilities are permitted to operate, and that the recommendation here is that they should not be expanded beyond their kind of permitted limits. And there's a whole mishmash of words here that try to get to that. We struggled with the best way to kind of articulate that, but I think that was the intent of the group. And if they can be provide heat or other energy products within those permitted constraints, then it would be consistent with this recommendation.
Got it. Okay.
I agree with you, Billy. My concern was that they were asking to be permitted by Burlington to move forward and expand. And I've seen this happen many times where the Intervale and the businesses within the Intervale have expanded without going through the state, without doing proper archaeological work or following FEMA requirements. And it's happened many, many times. And consequently, that land was put on the state historical register as the most highly sensitive archaeological site in this state. And I don't know how Burlington gets away with this, but they do it all the time. And so it just seems that the members of the council need to be aware that this is going on. And what Billy said is absolutely right. That's why we wrote that. But in lieu of what happened this week, I want people to be aware that they're trying the back door.
Thanks, Judy. Okay, so why don't we include that in a set of notes that goes up from this meeting that we can include in the packet that goes to the council, the expression of the concern of the way that this is being expressed in the public process around the thermal piece is raising concerns from at least some members of this task group, right? That this is, as in Judy's words, a back door towards expansion. Okay, Charlie?
David, I don't have a chance to raise my hand. It's Liz.
Hey, Liz.
If you're doing notes for this section, you should also note this was one place where the committee agreed it should go to the Climate Council, but didn't universally adopt the language here. And I can't remember if others, I had concerns about the lack of definition around expansion. I don't see it the same way as Judy in terms of BED's actions. You know, they did come to a public forum and they have announced plans. So anyway, I don't think there's anything more to say there other than if we're going to include notes, it should be a full set of notes, including that this was one of the places where council consideration was agreed to by the whole task group, even though the language itself was not universally adopted.
Okay, thanks, Liz. That's helpful to know. Charlie?
Thanks, David. I guess I'm a little concerned about hearing that there's going to be a set of notes that go with this. Just because if there are notes, who's writing them? What's the review? I mean, the whole purpose of this meeting was to allow counselors to ask questions and they can take that information and relay it to the council. But if there's going to be a written set of notes that then get attached to this, I think we're drifting back into concerns around wordsmithing, what's in there. Do we have a review process before it gets to the council? So I would advocate that there are no written notes and that this is that opportunity and just avoid any kind of addendums or attachments.
I agree. We spent a year on this. We're done. I don't think any addition, written articulation of the position of this task group is appropriate.
Okay.
That's fine with
And
me.
David, that was, there have been some attempts at sort of language that couches all of this, overviews, sort of leading components, background on discussions and presentations, and there was an agreement that that would not be included. So at this point, there will be a chance for the task group to present this to the council, and to be there to answer questions and have discussions. So I think that's where we're at.
Yeah, and I would certainly welcome any of our members participating in that meeting and sharing their own perspectives. I think that's great and will help make for a richer conversation with the council, but trying to document things in words is challenging right now.
Well, thanks guys for calling me out on that. And I'm absolutely happy to do that approach as well. So if you all can be there, great. And let's use this opportunity to the maximum to tease out some of these things that are important and the views that are in the task group. Bram.
You know, I think Liz's point is an important one, and but my sense is that it was addressed right at the sentence at the top that says, you know, the task group either consented or stood aside to allow this document to move forward. You know, I hope that communicates pretty clearly that there were differences of opinion, and people agreed to set them aside and let the document move forward. So hope it's addressed there.
Thanks, Bram. Yeah. Okay. So if we keep walking our way through here, number 3 is the piece that includes these option 1 and option 2. You can read what's on the screen there. About preparing for the phase out. And the importance of an evidence-based study immediately to be completed expeditiously by an independent expert that would be managed within the Climate Action Office in coordination with the Public Service Department. The study or studies should include. And here, as you can see with the option 1 and option 2, the only difference between those two sentences is in option 1, the investigation of when and how and if. And that and if clause is that difference between those two. And Jared's made reference to this and his views on this already. So I don't know if folks want to say anything more about this or have additional questions for clarity about this. And there's a fair amount of details, Jane's scrolling through about what would be in that study or studies. And I'd welcome folks from the task group, to talk about this. Jane, you're highlighting some things. You want to say a word about that?
Wanted to highlight, since Judy referenced the thermal expansion, that this was the highlighted area of how we dealt with the potential for thermal expansion.
Great. So there's a paragraph here talking about the implications for phase out in relation to the long proposed McNeil plant expansion for cogeneration for thermal heat for district heating. And then a series of considerations there. Billy?
I just want to highlight for council members that, there was a lot of discussion about the negative impacts of the continued operation of these plants, but also a good amount of conversation about the benefits that they provide to the forest products market and how that market helps private landowners maintain large tracts of intact forest land and prevents that land from converting into other uses such as development. So the study is also looking at the benefits of maintaining a market for these goods on kind of Vermont's ability to maintain those forests, the climate benefits that they provide, as well as the impact to the kind of landowners and workers in that sector if the plants were to close. Got it.
Right. And try to quantify some of that economic consideration that's been part of your conversation.
Yeah, and the ecological as well.
Okay. Great.
I'd like to add on to that if I could. One of the things that I've been saying through this whole 8-9 months, whatever it's been, we cannot put economy before the land, because if we don't have a healthy land, we will never have a healthy economy. And at every step, somebody tries to put economy first. And I just think that needs, when we're talking about traditional ecological knowledge, that needs to be something that's considered at every step.
Okay. Thanks, Judy. Great. So this is these bullets, and what you're looking at now are the big piece, the largest piece of the document, and they really try to get at what is the content of this work that needs to happen, the studying that needs to happen. I don't know, Jane, if you wanted to walk through a little bit more in detail of these bullets before we move on to the next piece. There's things that are worth calling out that people need to know.
No, I'll just, the one above the last one was got at what Billy was speaking to, sort of the appreciation of the impacts on the forest economy and how to take those into account if and when we were to move forward with analysis.
Great. Okay. So then there's a few more here about, and this is, you all spoke about this earlier in this meeting, should further explore the role of heat from biomass at a residential and commercial scale as a climate solution and the impact on Vermont's forests and other impacts such as public health, right? And here there's a specific suggestion about forming a new task group with diverse representation to consider the topic explicitly with the right composition and the right process. If a new task group is formed, members from this task group should be invited to participate. So that's a specific suggestion about that next step around looking at residential and commercial. And I don't, you all spoke of, Bram, you asked a question about that earlier, like trying to understand the relative size and scale of emissions. I don't know if there's anything, other questions, Bram, you have about this. Okay, great. And then the life cycle analysis, ensuring that the life cycle analysis that Jane's referenced already and others have referenced and make sure that investigates whether to account for greenhouse gas emissions from various technologies for burning biomass at the point of combustion. Okay, and there's some other sentences in that. I'm just not going to read them, but any questions about what that means or the intent behind that number 5?
I think there's a missing word there. Should there be a definite article between that and life cycle? The state should assure that the life cycle analysis contract.
Yeah. Thanks, Bram. Hey, Chase, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I may have just lost track of versions, but I don't remember that first sentence being the sentence that we agreed to. At least that I thought that we agreed to. That sentence used to read that there would be an assessment of the overall combustion emissions from burning wood. I'm curious to know when that change happened, just 'cause I don't recall it happening during a meeting. It could be that I'm misremembering, but I don't remember that happening during a meeting.
I'd have to go back and look, Chase. I honestly don't remember, but typically I'm editing the document and then just resaving it with the date of the meeting. So I think it's where we've landed, but I'd have to look. And it was, I think our last meeting was the one where we really dove into this one. So I'd be happy to look at the video and check that. Or if other folks agree with Chase and remember something different, happy.
I guess the thing that, so if we do this approach, then that second sentence, I think, kind of becomes redundant, since the first sentence is about life cycle, which would have embedded within the final number that comes out a calculation of sequestration. And so if we were to compare life cycle to sequestration, it would just be less of an insightful comparison than if we were looking at gross emissions to sequestration, which that second scenario is the one that is currently being discussed and proposed by greenhouse gas emission accounting experts that Maine is contemplating doing. And as we've changed it here, we would not be taking that step to reevaluate how biogenic emissions are calculated based on advances in accounting and what is occurring regionally. So if we decide to go this way, then I think that second sentence, we should take a look at it. Otherwise, we ought to go back to how it was before.
I'm not quite sure the path on this. I mean, Jane offered to go back and make sure there isn't a version control problem. We are extraordinarily late in the game to make a change. So I'm a little concerned about opening up that possibility right now. But I want to be sensitive, Chase, to the fact that you're suggesting there's maybe an error.
If we stick with the first sentence, and that second one is just odd, because you wouldn't take a life cycle analysis, which includes sequestration, and then compare it to a pure sequestration number, just because it would just be an odd comparison to make. You would look at gross emissions and compare that to sequestration. And so, yeah, at the risk of, saying what I said before, if we're going to go with this language, and I think that second sentence is an odd one to retain as well. Otherwise, we should go back to the other one.
Chase, I print off the recommendations every time, and 2 meetings back, it was different. It was, as you said.
Yeah, that's what I thought. It was the last meeting when we made the change, Judy. So that jives with my memory, because I think we dove deep into this one the last time we met, but I have to look at the doc. So we should have, what you should see, and I can, I'll just look right now. We should, normally what I do is post the recommendations we're starting with on the meeting date. And then I also save the updated recommendations from the day's work with that meeting date. So the last meeting should actually have 2 copies, but for me to see if that change was real, I'd have to review the discussion.
Yeah, we changed it at the last meeting because there's acknowledgement that the state is contracting to do this life cycle analysis. It's largely going to look at these issues head on. So I think that's why we changed it. If it's redundant to acknowledge that sequestration is part of a life cycle analysis, we could take it out. Doesn't really hurt that it's redundant. But this is the language we approved at the last meeting.
Okay. I was unaware that we approved this language for whatever reason.
I think it was, yes.
It's just that it's like 2 different types of greenhouse gas emissions accounting. And so if we go with a pure life cycle assessment here, that's one thing, that's fine. Life cycle assessments are helpful in assessing different energy sources side by side to one another. But it doesn't help us with the fundamental greenhouse gas emissions accounting sort of question about if we'd want to assess the actual burner tip emissions of these things. So I just went back and looked at the language from last week. I see the language that we started with during the meeting, which for the first sentence was, I'll just put it in the chat. I'm not sure.
I saved the 12.1 for today. Didn't save it on that page. So again, I'd have to look to be completely 100%. I'd have to review the video of the meeting.
If we do decide to keep that first sentence, then yeah, I'll just say that perhaps we should remove that language about compared accurately over time, since it would just be a difficult comparison to do accurately.
So I'm kind of walking into this conversation without any of the background to help you out about sort of what you did or didn't agree to last meeting. I think we are very much an 11th hour to make changes. So I'm not quite sure if we want to open up that right now. And Chase, I wonder if this is the kind of thing where you could provide a little flavor to the council when it meets. Liz, do you have a thought on this?
Yeah, I was going to suggest something similar. It feels like, given it's not so much, as Chase said, approved the language as agreed to send it on to the commission and, and the council rather. And that upfront statement seems to both give someone like Chase room on this particular provision, or others of us on others, to speak at the council if necessary, without reopening the document.
Okay. I think at this point in time, I think that's probably the sanest approach for you all. And Chase, I would encourage you then, when this goes up in the council, to mention this. Judy?
We haven't voted on this since the comment that Richard added. So why can't there be a change? And we operate on the 11th hour all the time. So there's nothing new about that.
I think, Judy, my understanding, just talking to folks ahead of this meeting, was there's been so much love and work put into getting to a place where folks are okay walking forward with this, with the caveats of the very opening sentence, that okay with bringing this up to the council, that when you start to tinker with the document, it's a very slippery slope that feels like a place you don't want to go.
So we're not gonna vote on the component that Richard added either. Is that what you're saying?
My sense is that you all looked at the change that we made in real time and felt comfortable with it. We didn't take a vote, but it seemed like a change that felt comfortable for folks. That's why I asked if folks feel comfortable with it.
Well, I'm sorry, but that doesn't sound like consensus to me. That sounds like controlling.
Would you like to be able to express more clearly willingness to walk forward with that footnote?
No, I'm asking that the conversation that Chase is bringing up in 5 be considered because we haven't voted on the final product.
My memory last week was when you voted on this document that it was voted with the contingency to add the footnote that Richard was providing. So I'm not saying one way or another, but I'll just say that my recollection, and others should correct me if I'm wrong, was that the vote included the addition of the footnote to be added. So it was sort of, in my mind, voted on, but with the appreciation that there would be a chance to review it. I'm happy. I think we could take a vote on whether to open up number 5 right now.
Yeah, and I just want to be clear, like number 5, I'm comparing to the other one. And I think all we did was put this in the context of the life cycle analysis that's being contracted for. We were just acknowledging that analysis is going to be nested in that work. And we will get a gross emissions analysis as part of a life cycle, right? That's how you net it. So I don't think
life cycle analysis works, Billy. But if typically it's done differently, like based on the presentations that we heard from. I don't mean to argue this point. I just think that if we move forward with 5 as it is, we should probably just put a period after the word assessed in that second sentence, just so that we don't have an odd situation where we're comparing a life cycle analysis that includes an assessment of sequestration with pure sequestration, just because it would be an odd thing to do. But if we're not messing with language at this point, we can move forward. It's just I think, I don't know, I would have recommended something to clarify this last week if I'd understood this was the change we were making. Perhaps I just missed it. I don't know what happened there. I don't mean to belabor the point either. This is certainly not a huge deal.
Okay. For what it's worth, my recommendation would be if it's not ideal, but it's not a big deal in your mind, Chase, my recommendation would be to stick with what you did last meeting and say you voted on a document with the caveat of a footnote. Because if we reopen it, it could be a significant amount of work for you right now, which wasn't the intent of this meeting. That would be my 2 cents. However, as Jane says, if folks want to do that, you can take a procedural kind of check-in to see if you want to do that.
Is there consensus to add a period after assessed?
fine with me.
Fine with me.
So in the spirit of not opening something up, but like fixing a problem, to answer Judy's question, would anybody have a concern putting a period after the word assessed in that second sentence there and deleting the rest of the sentence, which says so that those different numbers can be compared accurately over time? Are there any concerns about that? And we're in a very slippery slope right now. So I just want to recognize that slippery slope to say, but does anybody have any concerns making that one change to adjust the challenges that Chase is bringing up and the question Judy poses? Any concerns about that? And I want to look at every single member of the task force right now, just real quick. Even those who aren't on screen.
I'm having, I was out for a few minutes, and so maybe I missed some relevant conversation, and I apologize for that. But what's the problem with the comparing accurately over time language?
It's that I guess there is some ambiguity in that first sentence. It's unclear to me whether that sentence is saying that the analysis will evaluate whether we do a gross emissions calculation for burning wood or not, or if it's like we will do a life cycle analysis. But to the extent it's saying there will be a life cycle analysis of burning wood, in that life cycle analysis, there are going to be assumptions that are created in the mathematical model that account for resequestration of carbon dioxide over time, whether on a 20 or 100 year time scale. And so the calculation for sequestration would be embedded in that final life cycle number that would get spit out at the end of the process. And so if you were to compare that number with a pure sequestration number, in a sense, you're sort of comparing two things that overlap a lot, and it's not really, it would be a confusing comparison in my view. I'm wondering if perhaps one way to deal with that would be to delete the word those in the second sentence. And then that way we would just be saying we're comparing different numbers. We have a life cycle number and a pure sequestration number, and just we're not confusing the two and thinking that a life cycle number is a gross number. Or a period after the word assessed, or
you could just delete the whole second sentence that starts with the word carbon sequestration. On the theory that assessing that is part of a life cycle analysis.
You could, Richard, although I think it's, as this used to read, it said in the first sentence, we should do a gross emissions assessment for wood. And then the second sentence said we should do a sequestration assessment in Vermont. And that sort of recommendation, those two things go hand in hand. That's sort of the direction that greenhouse gas emissions accounting is moving for wood biomass. And so I don't know, it would be nice if we had a solid sequestration accounting number in the state of Vermont, even if we don't have a gross one, which I think we ought to. It's still a step in the right direction to no total sequestration, but
okay. So again, you could leave it as is. You could put a period after the word assess, or you could take out the word those. So in the spirit of this, I don't know. I mean, Chase, this was brought up as your concern of those three options. Is there something you want to quickly test for, and then we can and feel confident we did the best we could here? Do you have a preference there, Chase?
I suppose I would just put a period after the word assessed. And if I, I might be getting out over my skis here, but I might add the word separately. So it said carbon sequestration should be assessed separately, period. But I feel like I'm creating a bit of a thicket right now that we weren't trying to get into, and I apologize for that.
It's a very
I'm going to mute myself.
So what I would love to do is if there's a way to just sort of dance along that slope and not fall down it, and then we can move on, that'd be great. So my inclination is like removing some words might be easy. If everybody I'm looking at everybody on the task group, if we put a period after the word assessed and took out so those different numbers can be compared accurately over time, if anybody has a problem with that. And Jane, I just lost the image.
I think you want to see the task group for this so you can have votes and talk through this, David. So I'm going to put the current language in the chat, and then I'm going to put the suggested language in the chat so you guys can see.
Okay, great. That's helpful. Thanks,
I'm happy to defer to Chase's suggestion.
Okay. So why don't we go each task member just quickly, Jane's gonna put what Jane just put in the chat would be the new version that puts a period after the word assessed. And let me just suggest, if this is a quick fix and everybody says yes, let's do that. If it's not, I feel like we need to actually then pause and say, do you really want to open up this conversation? So let's do a quick round and make sure this is a quick fix that feels comfortable for folks. And if it's not, then we need to actually pause before we go further on this. But the specific suggestion is what's the latest thing from Jane in the chat. It cuts that last sentence off. Let me just go through each person. Any concerns about this? Task members, can you just shout out and say, okay, any concerns? Adam, I see you shaking your head, no concerns. Charlie, no concerns. Judy, any concerns? No. Billy?
I'll just say that this change doesn't preclude anyone from comparing these numbers over time. So I don't think it does anything personally, but yeah,
Perfect.
so
Okay.
it's fine.
Great. So, and who am I missing? Liz off camera.
My concern is purely process-based, just, one sentence is one sentence, but we went through a really long process and I thought that there was good and really positive work by all of us to work with one another. And so I am concerned about that from a process point of view, but I'm happy to defer to Billy's point that I don't think it actually does anything. Nor does the period after the end of that word make that sentence particularly meaningful. So, I guess I will abstain. How about that for the good of the group?
Perfect. Okay. Thanks, Liz.
This is Megan. I just want to weigh in that I agree with Liz. I don't see that this gets us anywhere differently. And I think ambiguity, I think this adds ambiguity, and I don't think that's helpful, but I'm not going to hold things up.
Okay. So we did this to see if there is a quick fix to a concern. It appears that folks are okay moving forward with that quick fix. And I think it also shows our deep discomfort in doing this kind of adjustment on the document right now. So I appreciate folks being willing to do that for this particular issue. And it just signals that today feels like a tough day to be doing this kind of work in the document. But thanks for being willing to do that. That's that quick fix right there to address a concern. Okay, so what we were doing was going through with the hope of providing greater clarity to council members who are with us today or others who will be involved in who may be involved in the council conversation. Number 6 is around the engagement that needs to happen in Burlington's Old North End and Winooski, and calling on the Just Transition Subcommittee and partnerships with relevant subcommittees, task groups, etc., and agencies should lead such efforts. So Judy, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I just want to make a note to Richard. This is where the demographics came from. When you're looking at the Old North End and Winooski, that's why it's at 17,000.
Okay, thanks, Judy. Yep. Any thoughts, concerns, questions, particularly from counselors who are with us today on this one?
David, sorry, I was waiting for a chance on the last one.
Oh, sorry.
If folks want to move forward, that's totally fine, and I'll bring this up as a counselor in the council meeting. I do think that there is a very surgical way to replace one word that reduces the confusion that Chase was speaking about and that reduces the other one. I'll just put it in the chat. If people don't want to deal with it now, that's totally fair, but I will probably bring it up there because I worry that the way that new sentence reads presupposes the way the life cycle analysis should be done. So that's there. It's replacing the word those with potentially. So, but
Right.
that's it.
Thanks, Jared. I
Yeah,
think, don't forget that one. Yeah.
David, I mean, Jared can explain his rationale, I think, here. I don't think we have to make the change, but I think this is intentional to let a counselor like share what he's going to bring up and let task group members respond, because I think that conversation is important. So I just wanted to flag that we don't have to make the change now, but I don't think Jared should feel like he shouldn't share what his thinking is.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
just briefly, I mean, I agree with Chase's interpretation and analysis that the way that that sentence was written presupposes an analysis that would be kind of overlapping and confusing mathematically. I also think that if we just end the sentence at carbon sequestration should be assessed, as you're reading that, it feels like it's referring back to the previous sentence and does not give the life cycle analysis the choice that is actually being suggested needs to be made in that first sentence. So I think replacing the word those in terms, which is a reference back to the previously mentioned emissions or study, with potentially leaves open the possibility that it's being asked to be assessed in the first sentence anyway. And it just says, well, at some point, whether it's there or whether it's in a net emissions inventory or some other way that we're looking at carbon sequestration, we need to know that number so that potential differences can be compared. That's my rationale. I'm just trying to add clarity and not replace one bit of ambiguity with another.
Thanks, Jared. Absolutely. And I think that's helpful. I don't see it in the chat yet. You're going to throw it in.
Oh, sorry. Let me read. I thought I had done it. Let me, it's just replacing the word those with potentially. From the first version.
Yep. Thanks. And Chase, yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to say thank you, Jared. I think that change makes a lot of sense. I think it helps resolve the ambiguity. And to the extent that gets made at the council or wherever, I just think it's a good suggestion that helps clarify mathematically what we're talking about here.
Great. So that's good to hear, Chase. So from your viewpoint, that kind of language addresses the concerns you have that you brought up. Yeah. Okay. That's helpful to know. Super. Anything else on this from counselors or others? Okay. Great. Okay, engagement. Anything else on the engagement question that folks would have? If you click on that little gray bar in the middle, it'll disappear, Jane, if you double click on it. All right, the seventh piece is the one we looked at with the footnote earlier. So I don't know if there's other comments or questions that folks have about that number 7 that we haven't already addressed in the footnote. Okay. Great. All right. So so that's what is in the document. I wonder if there are other things folks want to bring up. Anything else folks want to bring up? Lingering doubts, questions? Okay. So we wanted to make some time for public comment again one more time. So if folks who are joining our meeting would want to weigh in with any further comment, this is another opportunity to do that. I'll just pause for a second if folks want to, members of the public want to, people who are observing want to jump in.
Yeah, I'd like to just make another quick comment. First of all, I appreciate all the work you folks have been doing, and I know I'm coming in at the 11th or 12th hour, probably with a lot of ignorance behind me, but I am concerned that McNeil hasn't been truly I can't find any documentation anywhere that tells me how much CO2 emissions McNeil has generated over any year for the past, well, since 2012. So I'm glad that you're looking at this life cycle process. I hope it does clearly account for all emissions rather than lumping everything together as it's done in the current inventory on figure 19, which is fairly useless. So again, thank you for your work.
Thanks for the comment. Anything else, folks? People who've been listening in, observing? Colin? Go ahead.
Hi, thanks, David. Yeah, I just wanted to speak to the inventory a little bit because I put the inventory together for the state of Vermont. And yeah, I appreciate that comment. We do have estimates for McNeil and Reigate for wood combustion, but the current guidance that we follow to put the inventory together zeroes out biogenic carbon dioxide emissions. So we have included, as Jane mentioned, the kind of sum totals of those in the back as some additional information. But at this point, we have not included them specifically from the facilities at the facility level. In the next iteration of the inventory, I'm hoping to add some more information on that. But yes, that's kind of where we stand. So thank you for your comment, and we're working on it. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Colin. And I see Jane drop some links in the chat as well. Richard, go ahead, please.
I put in the chat a link to the brand new Addison County greenhouse gas inventory for 2017 and 2020, which of course I'm proud of, and I hope that some of you will take a look at it. It does not follow what Colin just said about zeroing out carbon releases from burning wood for heat. We don't have access to any way to estimate the life cycle consequences of burning wood for heat in our county. We don't know where the wood came from, how the wood lots are being managed, how long it's going to take for the carbon dioxide that is emitted from the wood that is burned for heat to be resequestered by forests in Vermont or elsewhere. We just that's a morass that we're unable to deal with, and so we went ahead and counted the CO2 releases from burning wood for heat at about a third of what they would be if we were burning coal, and a lot more than if we were generating it from solar or wind. You can look at the document and see how we did it. But this is using what's called a biological global warming potential. We used a value of 0.35, which seemed to be a consensus value in the literature for doing that. We did not think it was helpful to just zero out the greenhouse gas contribution of burning wood for heat in our county.
I'd like to make another quick comment on the VEIC report that Jane linked to in the chat, if I could. I
Sure,
would
go
like
ahead.
to look at scope 1 of that report. That report explicitly excludes biogenic emissions from McNeil. The report is basically useless because it doesn't account for the burning of the trees. It just looks at fossil fuel emissions. Check out scope 1. Check out the report in, I think, footnote 10 that VEIC report refers to, which also cancels out biomass burning before it even starts its calculation. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. All right. Other comments from observers?
I just wanted to say, I know we've gotten from Colin 2022 as well. So I don't know if anybody has the link for that.
Okay, maybe someone can drop in the chat if it's online. Thanks, Judy. All right. Okay, so the final item for us to deal with today is the council presentation. And here I'm walking in a little bit ignorant about what you've talked about so far. So maybe someone from the task group or Jane or somebody can say, this is what's been discussed so far about how to do this presentation. Where do you stand right now, and what additional clarity needs to be addressed so you feel comfortable about your approach for this? Have you discussed this already?
We haven't discussed it in detail, David. We should pick some representatives which we did for the last council meeting. That the conversation kind of got kicked off the agenda, but for this coming council meeting, we should just sort of discuss representatives for who want to walk through the recommendations, with the expectation that whoever can be there to answer and respond to questions would be great. I do just want to flag, this hasn't been sent to the full council, but there is a chance that the council meeting this coming Monday might get canceled. There are some issues around appointments of councilors and the needing to reappoint House council members. And so we are hopeful that that will be resolved this week, but we've told the steering committee that if we don't hear from Ledge Council or the legislature by Friday at 2:00, that we will notify everyone that the council meeting will have to be bumped, because we'll be down 8 councilors. So we're sort of waiting on that, but hopeful it'll be resolved and planning like it will. But just don't want you to be surprised if it gets bumped and needs to be rescheduled.
Thanks, Jane. So it sounds like our job right now is to decide on 1 or 2 presenters of this document, with the expectation that all members of the task group would be there, if I understand correctly, and would be invited to provide input they see is important input for the council. So I guess we need some volunteers, or if some other way, if you all want to decide who's going to present this content, knowing that you'll all be there as well, or certainly they're all invited to be there. Any criteria for that?
Well, knowing that Liz is one of the councilors who needs to be reappointed right now as a House, normally we've asked Liz to sort of carry the weight of it as a councilor, but Liz, I understand, I appreciate it. It's an awkward time. And then Richard and/or Chase, I believe, worked with her in the past to provide that broader perspective. So that's how we've proceeded. My hope is that we could do something similar to that going forward again, but leave it all again to you.
So implicit in that, Jane, is the idea that there's sort of a range of views in those 2 people who represent a range of views that have been present in this task group. Yeah. Okay. Any thoughts on that? Richard, Chase, others who would want to step up and be part of this?
I'm not sure I'm available at the time of the meeting on Monday.
Okay. Well, that's an important note.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. I'll try to make it, but I'm not sure I can be there.
I'm available. I'll be there.
Okay, great. Thanks, Judy. Chase, I couldn't quite hear what you were saying.
I don't know that I'm going to be able to be available either. I'd say most likely not, almost certainly not, but maybe.
Yikes. Okay. All right. So Judy, Billy, Adam, Megan, who am I missing here? Folks, any interest in stepping up?
I plan to be present, so I'm happy to help however the group determines is most helpful.
Same for me.
Okay. Well, you guys know each other pretty well. What would be a good pairing? sort of initial presenters? Or maybe there doesn't need a pairing? I am extraordinarily hesitant to suggest something because you guys know each other better than I know you. And the importance of achieving some balance.
Yeah, I think to Cheryl's comment, Liz has traditionally been our spokesperson at the council. I think she's done a great job of kind of in a very balanced way presenting the work that we've done. I don't know if Liz is hoping to be reappointed by the House, but if so, it sounds like our next meeting is not going to happen, and the council's meeting is not going to happen until those appointments are made. So, if she's willing, that may be the best way to go.
Okay. Liz is being volunteered.
Yeah, I'm fine attending the meeting as a member of the task group regardless and just quickly presenting this material. I don't think it'll be a heavy lift to do that. And I know that others will be present to add. So regardless of the appointment issue, I can do that.
I will be present if I can be, but I have a noon obligation. My experience with the last meeting was that I waited for well over an hour, and then they ended up not allowing any time for our presentation anyway. So I'm not optimistic about being able to participate, but I will be there as much as I can.
Thanks, Richard, and apologies for that last meeting.
Well, they had important stuff to do. It just was, they had more to do than they had time for.
Yeah, it happens. Yeah. Okay, and Judy, you'll definitely be there, right? Yeah.
We'll be there, and I have no problem with Liz presenting. And if they ask for a second opinion on anything, I'll just be there.
Perfect. Well, why don't we do that as plan A? And Liz, in your capacity, whatever capacity you are, a task force member, to be able to do an initial walkthrough. Judy will be there. Hopefully others will be there too, to provide additional flavor on these issues. And let's say that that's your plan. If that works for everybody, just making sure I'm seeing some head nodding things. Okay. Okay, great. And I think, Jane, is your recommendation to literally just show the document and walk through the document, scroll the document in the meeting?
Yeah, yes. Or, Liz has obviously can use her own judgment on how best to characterize the work of the task group and then lay out the specific recommendations.
Perfect. Okay. Okay. Great. I think that's the end of the work today, and also an important milestone for all of you, having a document that you're ready to share up to the council. Before we sign off, any last thoughts or comments, particularly around how to make sure this is presented well up to the council? Okay. Great. I think that's it, folks. And thanks for putting up with me today and helping to guide things along. And, an enormous debt of gratitude for the incredible amount of time invested in coming up with thoughtful recommendations. And here's hoping the conversation in the council is very interesting and a productive follow-on to all these recommendations. Anything else, folks, before we sign off, task force members?
Just want to
Thank you,
thank
David.
everyone for their, thanks, David. And I would just like to thank the group for the work. I don't know that we'll need much more after this. So it's been a huge effort. And thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
All right, everybody. Thanks so much. Take care. We'll see you hopefully Monday.